this circular mound. So I went back to have a look at my circular mound. I'd told him it was a circular mound with a ditch round it, but when I examined it thoroughly, the ditch didn't run all the way around it, it just ran part way around it, but here it wandered off to a point of 2 streams here, and from here it set off across one of my fields. There was a very distinct embankment bringing it across this, and it ran into, I remembered there used to be a pond here, but this had been open cast, and that pond, all that had been put back and had disappeared, but that's how I remembered it. And then there was an outlet here and 2 water courses, my water courses running across here, and suddenly the whole thing, like a jigsaw puzzle, clicked into place. What it was, the whole of the Shedden Valley was now a vast open cast site. The whole of it had been excavated. From being a narrow ravine, it was now some 1/4 of a mile across, and a great open cast excavation that had never been put back. So that was the explanation of that nightmare landscape. Now, the method of excavating it was to swill the land away with water. So they'd had to collect every drop of water they could find in the area and concentrate it at certain points to swill the land away and do this excavating. This explained the corrugations down the hillside. It explained that the water, the dry water courses. It explained the ponds, because the idea was first of all to fill up the pond, and then when the men who were doing the excavation shouted, the watermen breached the dam, and the whole of the water of the pond was sent rushing down there for the men with picks and shovels to do the excavating. Now, what were they excavating for? And the answer is limestone. This is just to show the classic system of water power, where you dam up a river, you take a water course into a pond, and then you run off the pond. The water does work, and then it returns to the tailways. So we had this system up Shedden where moorland stream was dammed up. A water course took the water into a pond, then the water did the work down the corrugations, not driving a wheel but swilling the land away, and then it eventually ran back into the river. So that was the system, and of course this was all going round in my head, and I thought, to prove it, I've got to go up to Shedden and map all these water courses and ponds to see if they do fit in with this system. So I went along to the Burnley Rural District Council at Oakley and said, would they give me some of the largest maps that they had, and they very kindly supplied me with the largest scale maps that they had, and I pinned these down on the bedroom floor. And then I got a smaller map, the 6" to the mile map, and I set off up Shedden, surveying it section by section, coming back to my bedroom and putting on the great map on the bedroom floor the section that I'd done on the smaller map. And eventually I built up a map which showed that this system was repeated time and time again up Shedden. There was a water course into a pond, and then there was a head race, and then there was a hushing, as they were called, and then the water ran back into the river. So that was the that was the point I'd got to when I was asked to give a talk to the Burnley Historical Society on any subject of my own choosing, and I said I'll entitle it the Limestone Pushings in the Shedden Valley, and I gave the talk to the Historical Society. Now, this is the system of hushing as portrayed by the German mining engineer Agricola. And he wrote a textbook called De Re Metallica. He wrote this textbook in 1555, and he had it illustrated by woodcuts by a man called Basilius Weffring. And these woodcuts are very authentic, and he describes all the different systems of mining, and one of the systems was this system of hushing the land away to get out valuable alluvial remains. In this case it's tin that they're recovering, and he describes the system perfectly as we get up Shedden, this is his Weffring's interpretation of a hushing. And what they did, they placed brushwood backed by stones across the hushing, and then they sent a torrent of water down, and men with these mattocks and various things were scraping and digging into the bank, and the brush, whatever they'd disturbed, was swept down to the water and was trapped by the brushwood. And then every so often, when the water had stopped flowing, they would extract everything that they got, wash it up, wash every single piece, examine it, and the valuable material they were looking for was further washed in these bubbles here, and here, it being tin, they're gradually getting up a stock of tin to take to the smelt mill. But in our case, the material we were looking for was limestone, and this is where I came across a certain amount of scepticism. One bloke who fancied himself as a considerable authority in the area, he came up to Middle Pasture Farm one night. He said, "This talk you've given," he said, "it's all piffle." He said, "I don't believe a word of it." You see, he said, "There's no limestone whatsoever nearer than Twiston going towards Clitheroe." He said, "There's none whatsoever in this area." Well, I said, "Come along," I said, "with me." And within 20 minutes we picked up lump upon lump of limestone and held it to him. And he said, "I've got to hold my hand up." He said, "You're right." He said that there is limestone here. And the point was that the limestone had been brought down by the glaciers from the Craven district of Yorkshire. And when the glacier finally melted, the limestone boulders, along with a vast quantity of sandstone boulders, was deposited in places such as the Shedden Valley. Now then again, I met people who said, "Well, that's all very well, but nobody would go to all that trouble just to excavate something as simple and as cheap as limestone." But the answer to that one was that limestone wasn't cheap in those days. In the Burnley area it was very expensive because it had to be brought 10 or 12 miles on the back of pack horses from Clitheroe, and it was quite expensive by the time it arrived in Burnley, and even more expensive by the time it arrived at Rochdale and Halifax and places like that. So if anybody found limestone on their land, and this indicates where the limestone came from, picture of Malham Cove that's been scoured away by the glacier, the limestone, the top of the glacier melted in summer, and in the summer sun, and the stones fell onto it, and then they were frozen in the winter, and as the glacier moved forward they were carried forward with it. Now, to substantiate my story of how valuable limestone was in those days, I'm speaking of the 17th century, that period, the stability that had come to the country had got people building their own splendid houses in stone. Previously houses had been of wood and wattle and mud walls, and these houses were very good houses to live in, because they were very dry. The mud walls absorbed the moisture and you didn't get condensation, but as soon as you built a stone house it was a totally different proposition. You found that build a stone house and fill it full of people and there's water pouring down the walls, the condensation from the breath alone. Now this happened in the castles of the Norman castles, where the walls were pouring with water and they had to be insulated with tapestries. Now the answer to this problem came, of course, with lime plaster.